Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast, of course, brought to you by Circa Sports. It's time. The boys are back here. Joe and Jake starting up the Tuesday rendition moving forward, probably through February. At least we'll be coming on this station every Tuesday, hopefully talking free agent pickups when it gets to that point of the regular season. But right now, we got some time to kill, and we're going to be doing our normal strategy discussions. And this time, starting out with our Dynasty startup conversation, we'll get into all the terminology, the different decisions you need to make if you're making the league, and roster-wise, what you should be doing. So let's hit the music. Again, welcome everyone to the Tuesday edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast. You can hear Jake busily typing away in the background. He is getting you set for all the different Dynasty conversation questions.
I'm just posting the tweet.
Okay, well, that works. That works too.
At RotoJake, at RotoWire, at JB Fantasy Sports. We got you covered here. I'm glad to be back here for another season.
Is this like year 5 for us now? I lost count. My wife was asking me earlier.
Yeah, I think I'm almost in 10 overall of the waiver wire podcast, but this has got to be about year 5 for us top tier waiver wire guys and Culver's Burger fans and all that kind of stuff, you know. But yeah, so of course we got to start the show in late July, so we're gonna have a lot of offbeat odds and ends topics to talk about here. But of course, meat and potatoes, the most important show you listen to all week, will be the waiver wire podcast here when the regular season gets going.
You and I have always focused, especially early on with these shows, different strategy elements. I have a little treat for us later on when we do our auction strategy conversation, which we do every year, really getting us prepared for the Stake League, which is the annual draft that we here at the office care most about. But I have something set up for that. We'll have different strategy element podcasts ready to go in the coming weeks. But for today, it will be Dynasty startup, sort of what strategy Dynasty wise you want to go with, things like that.
Exactly. And always, we're open to ideas here. If there's something, a topic that you really want us to talk about, at RotoJake, at JB Fantasy Sports, we'll do our best to work it in here, and obviously chime in on the chat too if you have any specific questions related to anything we're discussing right now.
Yeah, happy to do that. And also happy that we got to come back from our Vegas trip at Circa Sports. Circa Million and Survivor are back and bigger than ever with $16 million in total prizes. Enter Nevada, play from anywhere. Entries are open until September 7th at 2 p.m. You sign up at Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. We had a blast there, Jake. I know you were enjoying your time.
There is no better place to watch sports of any kind than Stadium Swim. I mean, I even watched a UFC event there last year, and it was better than going to T-Mobile, arguably, when you get to sit in the pool here, and you'll save a whole lot of money on tickets and drinks there. It's an amazing venue. I got to see an NFL Sunday there last October, and of course Tuesday at the pool leading up to the All-Star game. I think I clocked 10 pool hours, 10 straight Vegas pool hours. So it's the place to be, I tell you that. Yeah,
the location's awesome. Also, all the different things they have going on from a gambling perspective, but also different prizes. Like Circa Million has a top prize of $1 million and then $6 million in total prizes. You just pick those 5 teams against the spread each week. I think Nick Whalen and John McKechnie went on that last year. It's the quarterly and full season payouts for that 100% payback to the players. You have the Circa Survivor, which Jeff has done for a number of years. That has a prize pool of, I think, at least $10 million guaranteed. And you're just picking the winner, going week by week, as we had Chris List from a while ago with his Team of Destiny. You select one team each week straight up, all that stuff. We've heard that before, but we love Circa Sports for a variety of reasons. I'll be back there, in a little over a month now with all the guys from Sirius XM, and we're doing the Circa Sports Radio Row. So I'm really, really excited to dive into that and kind of be a part of the whole fantasy community when that time comes. But for us, Jake, it is the start of the Tuesday podcast. And again, most weeks during the season, I mean, every week, hopefully, you and I will be discussing waiver wire pickups. We have a pretty infinite list of guys, and we've been in on a lot of those players throughout the whole year, especially early on, the Kyron Williams, Puka Nakuas. 3 years ago, Justin Jefferson, right, his rookie year when the head coach was choosing not to start him for whatever reason, right? Those are instances we'll cover in season. Right now, though, focus on different strategy elements. And for us, it will be the Dynasty talk. Before we do that, there was news, at least throughout the day. There's been training camps kind of kicking off. I just saw Amari Cooper got his contract reconfigured. He's getting an extra $5 million. That doesn't matter from a fantasy perspective. There were 2 fantasy notes that I thought were important to mention. First, new head coach for the New England Patriots had mentioned that Jacoby Brissett will be the team's starter to begin the season, at least You'd assume the
Everyone
preseason
considers him the starter, right?
Yeah,
So this is
language.
very, very, very typical July news, right? You know, we got to fill the July show here, so we're starting with this kind of stuff here, which, you know, could be completely moot by week 1, but I believe there's some legitimacy to this. You have an 8-year veteran, a guy who at least has a 3,000-yard passing season under his belt, someone that can run a team. You know, how well we'll see, but it always is beneficial for rookie quarterbacks to not get thrown into the fire right away. I mean, Caleb Williams is not going to have that luxury, but Drake May now will. And like you said, you noted here a week 14 bye. Does he start after that, before that? We'll see what things are looking at. But honestly, really the best situations are when quarterbacks get to sit for a meaningful amount of time. Ideally, a whole season. Sometimes maybe even 2. Mahomes took that route. Obviously, the Packers have had the luxury of doing that with their last few quarterbacks, and that just seems to be the way to go. So nothing's too surprising for me with this news at all.
Yeah, the expectation is the Patriots will not be very good this year. I think they have one of the lowest chances to win the Super Bowl odds right now, which is fair. I think you and I do the over/under show, the infamous one at this point now, and I would imagine
they got to be sitting at about 6.5, right? I'm not even looking.
I think it's like 5.5. I think it's even lower than that, and I would probably take the under in that instance. Although I know the Patriots have some devil magic that goes with that franchise. I think their expectations are they won't be very good. So if I think
that devil magic maybe goes away without Belichick.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for. Jarabayo might be different because he was affiliated in some shape or form with Bill. But you're right. I would agree with you that you're hoping that goes away, at least from a casual perspective from us as fans. If the Patriots are truly content with not being super successful this year, then I would also wait with Drake May. I mean, history has proven, I think, that you can get these young quarterbacks, especially a guy like Drake May, who has a lot of potential, but hasn't really operated NFL offense for much of his career. The longer they can wait, the better. So we'll have to see.
Save him at least a half season of punishment of taking hits, because that early on season can take time off your career down the road.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The other news was that Brandon Aiyuk, of course, the Niners receiver, who has been requesting, I think he's requested multiple times now, a trade from the Niners, did report to training camp. You can always do one of those, I'm injured, my shoulder hurts, therefore I can't practice, but I still get paid training camp things.
Yeah, avoid the fine aspect of the whole thing.
But it's more or less what I assumed was going to happen. I actually drafted Brandon Aiyuk in my Scott Fishbowl a couple weeks ago in the live Madison draft, and I was a little bit concerned because if he were to be traded to Washington, I also had Terry McLaurin. I do not want to stack that offense from a passing perspective. But if the Niners are to win the Super Bowl, again, they have the second or third highest odds to do that this year, or best odds. It needs to be with Brandon Aiyuk on the roster. So I'm not surprised at all that he's reported. And frankly, I'd be very shocked if he were to get traded at all leading up to training camp or the regular season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't see why they would. Be a 26-year-old absolute asset that can help here. I still think that the best part about drafting Aiyuk to your fantasy team is that you get to name your team Aiyuk and Rally, which is a top tier fantasy team name. We're gonna throw that out there. But no, I mean, what's there to say about this? He's part of a large group of people. I think his ceiling is higher almost anywhere else, because I'm still not even sure Brock Purdy's in the top half of quarterbacks in the league, at least from a fantasy perspective, right? His ceiling's higher almost anywhere else from a fantasy perspective, and where he could go somewhere and be the number 1 target option as opposed to number 3 or 4 here in San Francisco. They spread the ball around so well. And, I mean, he's coming off a career year in terms of yardage and can continue to do that if they get things settled out here. But I guess this is just a wait and see for now. Again, this is not much actionable we can do about this in July.
Billy Harris is a good question for us, Jake, as we really start gearing into the Dynasty stuff. Do Joe Burrow, or Aaron Rodgers play a whole season this year? Not that it matters, Jake, but have you seen pictures of Joe Burrow's new haircut at all?
No, I have not. I'm sure it's phenomenal, as we'll get into with our draft later on. I did put a lot of stake in him, taking him in a first-year Dynasty league here.
What if I told you that he bleach blonde his hair? Does that make you feel any more comfortable about his draft?
I do a lot in the MMA UFC world, and there are a run of fighters, Charles Oliveira, Derek Brunson, who bleach blonde dyed their hair and then went on these incredible winning streaks, right? So I'm going to assume that same logic here applies to Joe Burrow and the Bengals. But the question we have here is it Burrow or Rodgers playing a full season?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say Burrow's more likely to than Rodgers. I'll take the 27-year-old over the 40-year-old over the one that's, I mean, both coming off surgery, but obviously Rodgers coming off a far more serious surgery. But, who knows what kind of witchcraft Rodgers has channeled to get himself healthy and all the crystal magic and whatever he's got going on these days. So, I guess we can't factor out that part of the equation here. These hypotheticals, abstracts are always fun before the season because there's no one that can tell you definitively who's going to play more games. I would guess Burrow, though, if it were, had to pick one or the other.
Yeah, I think both end up playing most of the season. Aaron Rodgers around quarterback 18 to 20 in redraft and best ball. And I think there actually is some value to that if you believe that Garrett Wilson and that Jets offense is going to look good. And I think it's fair to say if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, they will just by default. To what level is it going to be the couple of year MVP Aaron Rodgers from the Packers years? I would doubt that. But to have another season-ending injury would be pretty astronomically weird luck, even if you're talking about a 40-year-old quarterback. So I assume both those guys are going to end up being starters and healthy for most of the season. Although I am more nervous about the blonde hair stuff than you are, Jake. That's fine. As somebody that has hair, I feel like I should be having more say in the conversation, but whatever. That's okay. You have enough hair in the bottom that makes it work from the beard perspective.
Exactly. I know. We traded about 5 years ago.
Okay. We had one other dynasty question here, I guess. Dynasty question to lead into things, and it wasn't really a question, but more of a showcasing of sorts. We had Matt B trade Deebo Samuel and Rachaad White for Malik Neighbors. The question of Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze is probably better served for Alan Seslowski, who did a lot of dynasty-related questions on the Monday show. I personally think Odunze is a better receiver. Of course, he enters in a worse situation this year behind Keenan Allen and DJ Moore. And if you've been watching the HBO stuff at all, Malik Neighbors, a fan favorite of the GM, at least for the Giants. I don't know if Daniel Jones is going to be the quarterback at all that they hope he's going to be. And that makes me a little more reserved about Malik Neighbors' future. But certainly both those guys, really good dynasty receiver prospects.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we're going to talk about dynasty today. That's the main bread and butter of the show. And we're going to also discuss that in a regular, not superflex dynasty. We'll get to this more in depth, but, obviously receivers are what you build around. So when you go for a guy like Neighbors, you're hoping to have a really, maybe a couple bumps early on, but then you're really hoping to get a 10-year wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 for your lineup here, right? And again, all these dynasty questions depend on where you are in your dynasty team's trajectory, what your window is for winning. As somebody that just, when I play dynasty, I probably don't factor the dynasty stuff enough and try to win now every year. I'm going to take the Deebo Rachaad White option of that trade just about every single time. But I could see liking Neighbors, but it might take a couple years and a quarterback change for him to truly reach his potential.
I agree with you. So does Uncle Ted. Uncle Ted of Roshan Johnson fame also asks, who's going to be a better receiver this year, A.D. Mitchell of the Colts or Xavier Legette? Maybe it's more of a dynasty question as well, too. Xavier Legette, of course, was a first-round pick by the Panthers towards the end of that draft, obviously, and then A.D. Mitchell fell into the middle second round of the Colts. I kind of like A.D. Mitchell. The only issue is how much they're really passing with Shane Steichen as the coordinator and also Anthony Richardson and his rushing capabilities. You have Josh Downs there, who was a pretty impressive rookie in his own right, made our show a number of times. Like, I think it might be
this is a run-first team where Michael Pittman's a target hog, right? So in year one, give me Legette because it seems like there's a better path to targets. Overall, though, I would probably give me Legette, too. I'll take the higher draft pedigree here.
That's fair, and you can only go up in the case of Bryce Young's passing acumen, not his height, but his passing acumen. It's certainly possible that he can look better than what he did in year one, which was incredibly awful. I'm certain that Tepper, the owner for the Panthers, would love to see things a little bit differently, especially if he was pushing for Bryce Young over CJ Stroud, which has proved to be a monumental failure overall. Sorry, Panther fans, if you're somehow listening to this podcast, we're dunking on you 13 minutes in. Let's take a break. We're gonna for Blue Wire, at least for the audience perspective that's watching right now. We'll come back momentarily. If you are listening, maybe get about a minute and a half in, and we'll come right back to the dynasty conversation. All right, we're back, and again talking about startup Dynasty questions, maybe terminology. You had a long list of things that I think people need to be at least expecting for.
We can do some quick hitters here because I want to try to keep this podcast with a wide open door for everybody here. Obviously, we're going to have some hardcore Dynasty people that are in here, but we're going to have some newer 101 people too. So we want to try to cater to a lot of people. So real quick, Dynasty versus Keeper League. Keeper League, you get to keep a couple players, maybe one or two every year. There's usually a draft or an auction budget penalty associated with that in the Keeper League. A Dynasty, though, more often than not, is going to be you get to keep as many players on your roster as you like, so 10, 15 players, depending on how deep the rosters go, and you get to keep them indefinitely. There are some leagues, if you get into the new styles, which are unique and fun in their own right. I know Joe's a fan of that, where players have contracts associated with them. But for the most part, our standard staff Dynasty leagues, our regular, our superflex, you get to keep between 10 and 15 players indefinitely. So you do a first-year draft, and once you draft Xavier Legette or whatever, for example, you get to keep them every single year at no extra cost here. So that's just something to run through. Now, and that's not to mix up Dynasty with Devy leagues. Devy League or Developmental League is what that's short for, would be something where you get to actually include college players into this here. So we're not really going to dive into that too much on this show, but just know that those exist as well. And you can have, Otno does those same things too, where you can get players with contracts, as young as college here. And then, of course, Superflex versus regular. Regular can mean a lot of things, but for example, if we're just going to consider it Superflex versus non-Superflex. And Superflex is essentially a 2-quarterback league. You start your one quarterback, and then you start. There's another flex position added that a quarterback can be started. So of course, the original idea behind Superflex was to bring the value of quarterbacks up more, because quarterbacks are the most important real life player. Why are quarterbacks not the most important fantasy player here? So having a super flex shoots quarterbacks up to the top, as opposed to a traditional redraft fantasy league where running backs or even a top wide receiver might be the first pick off the board. On top of that, let's see, standard Dynasty rules. If there's a standard format here, when we speak in general abstract terms, we'll say, single quarterback, 2 running back, 3 receivers, tight end, flex. Most of the dynasties I've done have thrown out kickers and defenses, because that varies so much from year to year. It doesn't really, there's no skill to picking a good 10-year kicker in defense, if we're going to be perfectly honest here. And I don't know about you, but I'm team anti-kicker anyway here. So and then scoring wise, I mean, we'll just say half PPR, but they can be full or however you want to do it. And obviously there are different variations. Some start 2 tight ends, all this kind of stuff. But we'll try to keep it around half PPR and close to standard scoring as possible here. So anything else to add there in terms of terminology?
No, and I think you kind of outlined the big deal, especially from a Dynasty perspective. It seems like Superflex is sort of what everyone defaults to. Uncle Ted, I think
it's growing. Superflex is definitely growing. To the point where one of my long-term Dynasty leagues, I think you're in this too, they wanted to change over to Superflex, and the only startup that I did this year is a Superflex by default. So it's definitely something that's growing. And even there were some in Vegas this year. There were a couple extra Superflex drafts on top of our regular run.
Yeah, and user Uncle Ted had mentioned that Superflex is not great because it values the crappy QBs too much, like the Jacoby Brissetts or the Sam Darnolds of the world. And I think that's actually a fair statement that no one really discusses enough. Is it's not fun. Like I like the idea of quarterbacks mattering in fantasy like they do in real life, but Jacoby Brissett and Sam Darnold and those cast off Gardner Minshew's of the world aren't valued by the NFL as much, and yet you need to draft them oftentimes relatively high now.
Exactly. For example, just in our Superflex last year in Fishbowl, how many weeks did I start Tyson Bagent and Aiden O'Connell? So you're going to get a lot of that in Superflex. And just going off the RotoWire rankings by default, in Superflex, if you go to our Superflex rankings on the website, Ryan Poole does a great job with these. The top 5 ranked players are all quarterbacks in Superflex, and 8 of the top 10 are quarterbacks. Then, and then of course we start getting into some receivers, which, once we get into some of the principles more, are generally more important. Now, compare that to our regular standard Dynasty rankings, right? And I don't know if this is too low for a quarterback, but in regular standard Dynasty rankings, our top 8 players are wide receivers, and then, of course, followed by young running backs, Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. And the first quarterback, Josh Allen, right now, the number 1 Dynasty quarterback, doesn't check in until 35, which might be a little low. There are situations in standard Dynasty leagues where when the rosters are really, really deep, deep. People can hoard quarterbacks, so quarterback value will go up a little bit. But in any kind of a standard roster, 10, 12 players, with a handful of reserves, quarterbacks are moderately valued. So obviously, superflex quarterbacks shoot way up. They're the highest scorers out of any position, and when you can start two, it's advantageous to start two. In the draft that we'll refer to, which I just linked under the tweet here, it's at RotoJake, at RotoWire. It's the sleeper draft for the podcast listeners. We'll be out there on all your favorite podcast platforms, of course. The link will be in the description there, so you can kind of follow along when we go to that. But I had the 12th overall pick in a first-year Superflex startup, and I went Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, right? Get my young-ish guys that I know are going to be starters for the next 5 to 8 years.
Yeah, and I'll go to, this is going back to the strategy element of things. And when I'm thinking of people who are listening to this podcast, it's evergreen, like much of our strategy guide podcasts tend to be. But to help out the Uncle Ted questions of the world, where the Sam Darnolds and Jacoby Brissetts of the world are too valuable, if I'm making a startup superflex, I want to have the scoring system elevate in a way that the Justin Herberts and Joe Burrows and Lamar Jacksons score more and are premium enough that there is value relative to the Jacoby Brissetts and Sam Darnolds. I don't know quite what that tweaking would be, but that might be the marriage, that if you want to have the quarterback position relative to what it is in NFL, which is very important, let's find a way scoring-wise to get additional points per 300 yards passing or X amount of touchdowns. That's maybe the correct way to go.
And the value over replacement player, when you get to this level of league and quarterback, a lot of people refer to it as VORP or whatever, and that's how some people go about calculating their auction values. Usually every kind of auction formula has some component of VORP, value over replacement player. You think about, if I'm getting Burrow and Herbert, I'm expecting 20 to 25 points a week, and there's 30-plus point ceiling there every single week out of 2 spots in my starting lineup here, of course, minus bye weeks, where if you have someone like Jacoby Brissett, you're going to get a lot of 12-point weeks in there. And what's the actual ceiling? Maybe 20? That's twice as many points here. So there's a big-time value, when you take a slightly, even if you say these guys aren't that great. If you disagree with me, you don't love Burrow and Herbert, they're still above replacement value, I would say, in terms of quarterbacks in the National Football League. And then you get your Brissetts and whatnot that are going to be lower. There's just a lot of value to be had there.
I have a counter to that strategy, or at least idea, Jake, but I want to get into our overall draft concept and what we ended up doing. Again, the Superflex RotoWire startup that we did, now 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was during the week and weekend of 4th of July, which maybe caused complications for some folks out there. Again, it's linked on both of our Twitters, at JB Fantasy Sports, at least mine, at RotoJake. If you're listening, you can kind of go back and go over overall the idea and whatever I ended up doing. We did this draft on Sleeper, so there was the ability, which I took full advantage of, Jake, to trade picks during the draft itself, the start ones. We can talk about that too. Yep. Let's get a word from our sponsors, though, here from ACME Real Fantasy Football. What's with the fantasy scores looking like an NBA All-Star game? Bad defense is not great in NBA All-Star, or in the case of fantasy football. Let's get real with ACME Real Fantasy Football. It's the top pro teams. They average around 28 points per game. That's how real ACME football fantasy scoring system is based. The system is also very accurate compared to the actual game score. Each team drafts only 9 players filling the primary positions. Benches are only used for injured players and bye week guys. And this leaves 200 free agents available to improve your team. You can listen to our podcast every Tuesday to find those guys. Weekly waiver wires give preference to the bottom of the standings, and you got league rankings all changing to keep it competitive for the entire season. ACME Real Fantasy Football also has a one-of-a-kind playoff format, selecting a new lineup each week. All teams are competing from week 1 through the Super Bowl. 12-team leagues start at only $120. Go to acmerealfantasyfootball.com and sign up today. All right, so I mentioned that our draft, again, we did this 3 or 4 weeks ago. You can see the live results on either of our Twitter pages, at JB Fantasy Sports, at RotoJake. You and I had different strategies. We did, and this is one of those, if you're starting the league up now, I want to say you must do it. This is a must. Make sure you allow people to pick your spot. So KDS, we do this for the Beat Joe Bartel Online Championship for NFFC, same for Jake's leagues. We had the option to pick where we were going to be in the draft order. This was a 3rd round reversal. So in the case of the number 12 pick, which I think you got later on,
I took
there was value to that.
I was pretty surprised that the number 12 pick went on. Of course, I was late to the party throwing Chad on, so I didn't know exactly when what draft selection I have. But yes, it is important to let people pick their draft spot. And I definitely wanted 12 because of the 3rd round reversal. That basically meant I got picks 12 and 13. And then I get
36.
Yep, and then I get the first pick of the third round. So obviously I went 2 quarterbacks to start with, and then we'll go position by position, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But I took Sam Laporta actually with the first pick of the third round, which is a little bit of a unique take. I'm not sure everybody would have done the same thing, but I've got my reasons for that. So. Yeah, part of it was that. Part of it, I also knew it was 4th of July weekend, and I wanted to just get 2 picks knocked out at a time and not have to worry about, drafting twice in the middle of a round. So obviously there's that factor too, a little selfishly, but I still think I like how my draft worked out here. And even the 11th pick in the draft, Nick Whalen, if you want to look at his draft, we both agree that it was pretty good. And he's a good example of what to do when you're not going to place a premium on quarterbacks very, very early and instead just grab really good running backs and receivers here, because you can get a nice team doing it that way too. Although that's not necessarily how I'd always go about it. It worked out for him in this scenario.
I want to let the listeners know I can do basic math. So Jake had 12, 13, and then third round reversal would mean that you were,
25.
25, 26. Yeah. Not 27, not 36. And if you gave me 5 guesses, I might actually get to where it was. Either way.
I just rolled with you on that one. I trusted you. What am I doing? I
Never trust me with math.
Yeah,
ever.
Enough. Okay.
I like the overall strategy. Again, I don't know where you were in the order picking 12. I was surprised it was there. I think I had the first overall pick among draft spots, and I took 4 because I knew that was sort of the end of the tier of the quarterbacks. Again, if you're doing a super flex startup, the idea is going to be that quarterbacks are going to be premium. And it was, 8 of the 12, 10 of the 12 ended up being quarterbacks in our startup draft. The end of the first tier of QBs.
Yeah, the first 7 and 9 of the first, the first 7 and 10 of the first 12 picks were all quarterbacks. Yep. So just a very good illustration of superflex in general.
The end of the first tier of quarterbacks is Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and then for me, Lamar Jackson. So to get one of those 4 guys and then to get the earliest pick in the third round was the valuable idea. So I ended up, even though I had the first overall chance to get a pick, I took 4. Alan Sazowski smartly ended up taking 1-1 overall a little bit later on in that. But again, if you are doing a startup dynasty draft, giving people the option to pick where they want to pick, I think is very, very valuable in its own right. So you had mentioned already a little bit, Jake, the strategy.
Yeah.
What your team ended up looking like.
I want to backtrack a little bit, though, to get to some quick overarching dynasty decisions that you kind of have to make before your draft even starts here, before we dive too far into this, right? So at the start of any first-year dynasty draft, you have to decide, am I going to try to win now, or am I going to try to build a dynasty, right? Building a dynasty is kind of the point, and that's why people join these types of leagues, right? Because they want to, grab a really young team, have a foundation that they can build around forever and ever, and win your league 5-6 years in a row. I'm going to tell you why that, in my mind, is all BS, right? And why some of the teams that I think did the poorest in this dynasty draft are the ones that were really, really rookie heavy, right? So going rookie heavy, of course, is going to give you the highest longevity, but also you're going unproven talent, and there's no way to filter out the busts here. So that's also it's a way to build a dynasty if you do it perfectly right, and you get all your ducks in a row and you hit on every one of those picks. But that's also a way to ensure that you are losing 3, 4, 5 years in a row here. And in my mind, the biggest point about fantasy football is you want to have fun, right? So yes, if it comes down to later in the draft and you have a decision between an aging guy and a younger guy with maybe a little bit more upside that hasn't proven it yet, then yes, of course, this is a dynasty league. Maybe you want to lean towards the other guy. At the same time, you can find aging guys. I got Devontae Adams in the 7th round here. You can find guys that are on the back end of their career for a super value, which I did with a couple other guys too that we'll discuss. So in my mind, you want to think about your window. And I never worry about a 5-6 year window, because even in the industry, even in these industry leagues, I've never been part of a dynasty league that's lasted 10 years. I mean, get out of here. That's never going to happen. Somebody's going to drop. Somebody's going to die. Like, I hate to be morbid, but like something's going to happen. Someone's going to leave the industry, leave a job. You can never count on a 10-year dynasty league here. And trying to do that from the very beginning is just very foolish, in my opinion here. So my magic number's 3. I shoot for a 3-year window, right? I want to be able to win that league within 3 years. And even if I'm not winning, I want to be in the playoffs and have a shot to win. Because you know how it goes in fantasy football, right? As long as you're in the playoffs, it doesn't matter if you're a 6 seed, 8 seed, whatever your league does. As long as you're in the playoffs, you have a shot and you want it to be fun. And you could have the best team, the best dynasty, and still get bounced by somebody who got hot in the first round of the playoffs. Somebody that had Njoku or whoever it was last year, that got really, really hot and bounced you here. So for that reason, I almost do it like the Brewers do in a sense here, where they never really tank and go all in, but they make the playoffs every single year. So there's a baseball analogy for you folks out there. So in my eyes, yes, I did take some younger guys. I got my quarterbacks out of the way. I got 26, 27-year-old quarterbacks, which mean I at least have a solid 5 years, possibly more, out of these guys, because, again, you're keeping these players indefinitely. I waited a little bit on receivers, knowing that I could get some value older receivers later, and I could always retool the position later. And, yeah, you just want to put yourself in a position to succeed, a position to make the playoffs, and to shoot for a title. I've been in the playoffs every year in our other staff dynasty league. I haven't quite gotten over the hump. I've taken second place, I think, twice maybe, with a couple of third places in there. I've cashed there every single year, almost, because I always put myself in a position to succeed. I had a really good draft that I took a couple running backs, which is kind of maybe advise against, which we'll get to in a sec when we do position by position here. But the idea is you don't want to count on that league being around for any more than 5 years to begin with, and make sure to give yourself at least a 3-year window. If you draft all rookies thinking you're going to set up a dynasty, you have to bet 1,000 or at least 800. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time and you're going to lose, and you're going to be just down in the dumps and not have any real pathway to succeed if you don't have some good players that are already proven and established.
We're disciples of Mario Puig and John McKechnie on this show. These are the guys that we listen to every Thursday on the RotoWire Podcast Network, but also know a lot of the trendy pickup guys. They've been following people from college the whole way. We're also disciples of Alan Slazowski when it comes to the dynasty perspective. And I've listened to every one of Alan's podcasts now every Monday for it feels like decade at this point.
That's a good plug. All off season doing Monday Dynasty shows. If you're interested in Dynasty and you aren't listening to Alan's show already, definitely go back and rewind his shows from the summer.
Well, I was going to say that he just says it's a basic math thing, which again, I'm very bad at. But if you say the entry fee is $50, you want to be able to win once every 3 years, because then you're paying over on your entry fee every single time.
Window.
Again, regardless if you finish second, third, whatever it is, you're at least getting some of the money. So that's a great concept. And you mentioned the other part of it too. What are the odds that this Dynasty League sticks together? You and I are in the industry. We have now done this, the first one, the 14-team non-superflex league. I think it's entering year 4.
Our non-superflex league was damn near close to folding before year 4. There are a lot of people that wanted out of that league.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So that's an industry league with people that are more or less paid to do it. Now
people that work in fantasy football for their freaking job, and all these it's nobody like left. I mean, one person left RotoWire out of that whole thing, and he's still around. So where are we at? You think your group of friends in your dynasty league is going to stick together that long?
That's what just keep it. Like, dynasty leagues are super fun. Understand that. And if you are with a group of degenerates, which I think we are, at least if we're getting paid to do this from a job perspective, more often than not, it's going to work out. We started out this RotoWire Superflex Dynasty League earlier this month. I assume that'll last a long time too, but this is almost like divorce rates in America. Like, odds are saying it probably won't last all that long. Is that a bad?
That's the best way to put it, Joe. That's the best way to put it. Exactly. I love that. Yeah.
Okay. From a positional perspective, when you're doing your start, we had talked about
we hit quarterbacks quite a bit. Yep.
Let's go to the running backs, and I know you had some outline points there.
Yeah. So running backs in general, the point you want to make with running backs in a dynasty league is, again, if you're trying to win right away, like we just recommended, then yes, you can put some value on a running back. Normally Christian McCaffrey is going to go much lower in a dynasty league here, because a running back's prime is only 3 to 5 years in general, and you take him for a couple years. You might have the best back in the league if he's healthy, and then you're toast compared to a receiver whose prime might be 8 years. But in general with running backs is you can afford to wait until you're in win now mode. Right? Usually running backs are the last piece of the puzzle here when you're trying to go out and win a title. Your quarterbacks, your receivers, they last a much longer time, even your tight ends are much more established here. But running backs are kind of the last thing you look for. You want to get a good running back, and then That's what you shoot for in the trade market. And people are going to be more willing to trade running backs in their trade market, especially if they're rebuilding, because they're not as key to the rebuild. So you can throw a first, second round draft pick for a running back late in the season and fill your roster out in time for the playoffs here. So just, to put that in a little bit of context, my draft, I went Burrow, Herbert, Laporta, Devontae Smith, and then I took A-Chain as my first running back in the 5th round. And then I took 4 more receivers, 6, 7, 8, 9, before taking Tony Pollard in the 10th round here. My strategy is, obviously, I've got my quarterbacks in the Superflex League. I got Laporta, my tight end. I'll do quantity over quality in receivers, but I also think I got some quality receivers. And then if I'm in the playoffs and a running back's my missing piece, I'll just trade for one. I'll throw some of these rookies I took out. I'll throw out some draft picks. I'll trade one, and I'll go try to win now, because that's what makes Dynasty Leagues fun. Am I disappointed with A-Chain and Pollard? I also took Nick Chubb a couple rounds later here. Again, he's going to be super diminished in value in a Dynasty League, but, you can get guys like that, later on. And then I went pretty rookie heavy down the end, because this draft was 30 rounds, and I have no idea why. But but that's the point here. Anyway, the overwhelming idea with running backs is that's one that you kind of wait on until you're ready to win now. There's always going to be running backs available at the trade deadline. I foolishly made moves for some running backs in the past here. I remember investing big. I didn't have my 2nd round pick this year in the other league, because I traded Pete for Delvin Cook 2 years ago. But, it is what it is. Running backs are your piece that you get last, essentially, and they are devalued. I mean, we had young running backs taken in the 2nd round here: Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson. All of them went before McCaffrey in the 3rd round.
I was going to ask you, because this is very different, at least strategy-wise, from what you did in that 14-team league startup that we had now 4 years ago, because you had Jonathan Taylor and I think Derrick Henry within the first 5 rounds, right?
Yep. I took both Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry with my first 2 picks, actually. But that was Jonathan Taylor's rookie year, number 1, and I have no regrets about that Henry pick after what he's done for me the last 4 or 5 years. But again, that was me being pretty new to Dynasty and not knowing that wasn't necessarily advantageous. So, but I'm going to pretend that I was zigging when other people were zagging, playing 3D chess, got the best running backs in the league for a good long while, and did that on purpose. But really, that was kind of me being a little bit naive and newer to Dynasty leagues. But now we've been in that league for a bunch of years. We're starting new ones. I feel a lot better about where I'm at now with respect to Dynasty experience here. If I had to do it all over again, I don't think I would have done it the same way. I would have still taken Taylor, but I wouldn't have used that pick on Henry, especially considering it was a PPR league. But Henry was a god at that point in time. And in the end, it worked out for me. Sometimes you get lucky.
It's interesting, and I note that only because I ended up going 2 running backs within my first 3 picks. I took a quarterback with Lamar Jackson. I took Jonathan Taylor. We'll discuss that overall selection a little bit later.
Yeah, I'm a little curious about Jonathan Taylor over Breece.
No, we'll get to that. That's a separate section. But overall, and then I had Etienne, and I ended up getting Josh Jacobs as well too. I think either in the 4th or 5th round via trade. But I felt really comfortable this year, and I think this is the other point that I'll make, and it leads a little bit into the receiver conversation too. Mm-hmm. Depending on when you're doing these Dynasty startups, it matters. And I want this to be an evergreen podcast, especially for new listeners or people putting together Dynasty shows. But what advice I'd give for this year, Fantasy Dynasty, is going to be different than next year. It would have been different in 2020 when we did our other one too. I think this year's tier of like T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin receivers is deeper than we've ever seen. You can throw Marquise Brown in there. I've done 35 best balls now, and I know it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I feel more comfortable about my wide receiver 2 coming from round 5 and later than I ever have in past years. And I think capitalizing on that value, that depth of the wide receiver 2 market, whatever it is, maybe feel better about getting my running back 1, 2, and 3 early on. Because if you're saying what's the running back 2 market, it's, are you going to guess right on David Montgomery or James Conner or Najee Harris or, in this case, Tony Pollard? And you can do that. I think actually your roster is a great way to successfully show how to do that. But when you're playing a bunch of sharps like we were, or guys that just follow the ADP boards on Sleeper or ESPN, it becomes a lot more tricky. So just keep that in mind. And I think, again, for receiver, there's value for that middle tier wide receiver 2 group, but also knowing they're going to last a long time, I think matters a lot as well.
Yep. And the last thing I'll say is that this seems to be an above average year for younger running backs, whether it's Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs, each in their second years, Breece Hall being
his third year.
Yep. Yeah. It's his 3rd year, but it's his first year you always look at the second year after the comeback from the knee surgery, right? He had a partial year last year coming back. Now he's had the full actual ideally healthy offseason. So Breece Hall is right up there. It's just a really good year for young running backs, and we'll see how it plays out, but it might not be the same next year. So if anything, this year the running backs are slightly inflated because you've got younger guys entering the prime of their career that could have 3 or 4 good seasons ahead of them.
I think I covered the wide receiver strategy aspect, Jake, well enough. I want to get a word from our sponsors, but I really want to hear overall what you thought the teams in this league did and answer a few questions we didn't have. So real quick from Fantrax, is there something you wish your league had or features that are missing from current leagues? Bonus scoring, like we mentioned with the quarterbacks, or custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? We'll look no further because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fandraft even offers college fantasy football leagues, which has been approved by John McKechnie. I think that matters a lot because he does a lot of the college football stuff for us. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. If you're coming from another service, that's not a problem because Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Well, Fantrax commission tools also allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion that you won't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league and $6,000 in cash. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing one for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports.
We even did a college basketball league on Fantrax last year.
You
can't really do that just anywhere, right?
They really do have customizable stuff for every sort of form. I think
customize what conferences you want to use.
I think they did a rugby one. I don't want to say I'm wrong, but
I know they're big on a lot of different soccer leagues too.
Yeah, so. maybe I'm thinking of that. It was something from overseas that I'm blanking. But I know Peter Schenke had sent out an invite in one of our Slack channels.
I did my first Premier League fantasy on Fantrax, but anyway, that's yeah.
We have maybe 10 or so minutes, Jake, to discuss what the results were of our draft itself and kind of the teams we liked. And I'm doing it not so, hey, Jake's draft is really good, even though yours was, Jake. Yeah. It's to showcase for the listeners. And again, you can follow along with the draft at JB Fantasy Sports on Twitter or at RotoJake on Twitter. We have that result posted.
I quote tweeted the link from RotoWire, and just under I left in a comment here the actual link to the draft. It's a link on Sleeper. You can click it. It's interactive. It's easy. You can click on any of the team names at the top or just hover over them, and it'll show you any of the traded picks. I had to do that with Joe, who was a trading picks machine.
Yes. Real quick before we do that, I think this is a really good question from Brendan, who asks, in a 12-team 4-keeper dynasty, he's deciding between Travis Etienne or Nico Collins. Now, if you just went off our rankings overall, superflex-wise, I think Nico Collins probably would have been the highlighted choice. He already has 2 quarterbacks, Josh Allen and Anthony Richardson, and the other keeper he can bring over sure is Justin Jefferson. So in this case, Nico Collins be your wide receiver 2, or you'd have Travis Etienne operate as your running back 1. Is there one that you prefer over the other, Jake?
I'm double-checking ages real quick. Both of them are 25 years old. This is a very good question. This is one that really makes me think a little bit. But I am going to go in this situation here with Nico Collins because, one, we know what we're getting from Stroud. We have a good quarterback here. I don't know what's going on with Stephon Diggs, on the other hand, but Nico Collins proved that he can be an excellent receiver, a wide receiver 2, maybe even a wide receiver 1 in any scenario. And I just think your window for utility out of Nico Collins is going to be 5 years, where it's going to be 2 or 3 years with ETN tops. He kind of runs like a bowling ball, takes a lot of hits. And again, it's the same principles that we went back to here too. Save and get a better running back in the draft, or trade for an equal or better running back when you're about ready to win the league. Because look, you've got your quarterbacks. You've got the number 1 dynasty quarterback, arguably the number 1 dynasty receiver, another quarterback who's going to be good for 10 years as long as the running doesn't get him hurt. I'd grab the established receiver before the running back here, and then just go get your running back when it's time.
I think there's a bit of variance to the question. I would look at the rest of my league mates and rosters and say, is it possible that ETN becomes a top 3 guy if I drop? Because if that's the case, there are going to be a lot of receivers that were kept, and I think Nico loses a little bit of value. So if the idea is we'll keep Jefferson and keep Nico and trade Nico for whatever running back I might want, that becomes a little bit more difficult if everyone's doing the same thing with the receivers or not. So I would be a little a little less hesitant to do it. I did take ETN in our startup draft, but I didn't have Nico on the board. And I think that's part of the equation with this.
Nico,
so,
I mean, not that this matters too much, but Nico just signed a 3-year extension, so there's some stability there too.
And ETN still has he has one more year left of his rookie, or maybe 2 more years left.
Mm-hmm. And we're already, I mean, it's been a while since this last note, but Doug Peterson wants ETN's workload to decline too. He said that, I mean, back in May, I guess.
I mean, he can want that, but it's Tank Bigsby and nothing else behind him, and Tank Bigsby's nothing. So
yeah, as we found out, hey, don't forget about Dearness Johnson.
yeah, we all are.
Right, anyway, let's stay on track here. I want to talk a little bit about my draft because we skipped the whole tight end strategy situation, and I think that ties in really well to my part of the Dynasty draft that we did here, where third round reversal, the first pick of that. Let's see, there were a couple guys on the board here that I could have that I could have went with here. I mean, I didn't take Christian McCaffrey, who went right after me. I didn't take Trey McBride, Puka Nacua, Malik Neighbors, Jalen Waddle, Olave. I already had my quarterback, so I wasn't taking Prescott, Tua or Daniels. But anyway, I went Sam Laporta first in my third round reversal, pick 25 overall, Joe. And the reason that I did this, or wait, because this was a 12th. Yeah, this was a 12th team.
You're fine.
The reason 25. That I did this. Anyway, okay. Yeah, so we need to go over this at length. With tight ends here, there are a couple schools of thought. My idea is, at least right now in this very class, Sam Laporta and even Trey McBride fall into this category of guys that we know can do it because they have for a year. And basically, in my eyes, someone like Laporta can be Kelsey for the next 8 years. You saw the rookie season. Obviously, he was a league winner last year. So I took Laporta because I wanted that stability in the tight end position. And I look at it similar to wide receivers here, where there's definitely more longevity than running backs there. And you get the occasional Kelsey or Kittle that are absolute standouts and can really carry a team for a lot of years. So I ended up going with Laporta in that situation because, again, I think I could have the number one tight end for 5 of the next 8 years, possibly. I mean, that seems like it's a pretty floor type prediction here. And maybe even McBride falls into that bit. Brock Bowers is another one. I know you traded a pick for with McKechnie to get Brock Bowers.
Other way around. John, Georgia alum, traded to get Brock Bowers when there looked to be a run for tight ends. And I would have considered him at that pick. I didn't think the board had really seen it. So, yes, John, being a Georgia guy, was very aggressive going and getting him. Yeah,
so, but in my opinion, it's Laporta or McBride this year. And those are the guys that you would reach for in a dynasty type league. After that, I think you can get away with punting it. I mean, or if you do the win now mode thing, Travis Kelce went 4, 5, 6, 7th, 6th round, I believe. 1, 2, sixth round. Travis Kelce went. So if you're in win now mode, you could grab him in the 6th round. I was actually surprised Kelce came back out to play this year. I thought he was going to retire. I thought for sure that was my bold prediction of the offseason.
He's really there for at least 2 years, which I think is kind of relevant from a dynasty perspective.
Definitely. I mean, you can see, there's a handful of guys. You think of your Zach Ertz's this year that you grabbed late, and you got a year or half a year at best here. But in my mind, it's either grab one of those top 2 guys, or unless an extreme value comes to you, you just kind of punt it in tight ends. That's another piece that maybe you can find. You can at least find a lot of mediocre tight ends emerge out of nowhere, and just like running backs, there's something that you can usually weasel your way into at the trade deadline to be able to make something out of it here. So again, I saw Laporta on the board. I wasn't quite ready to commit to McCaffrey because the running back thing. I had already taken my quarterbacks. Puka, great. Puka and the Neighbors, Waddle, Olave, Hill, those were the next receivers on the board. Actually, if anything, I was thinking Tyreek Hill more than anyone. But because I was not as confident in any of those receivers being a home run, I ended up going with Laporta, and I like how that worked for my draft.
Yeah, I think your team ended up looking pretty good with Laporta. I ended up punting on tight end for the most part. I think it ended up being, and I had to make sure to look, it was either Pat Freiermuth or TJ Hawkinson. I think I had the combo of 1, 2, and Hawkinson, in the case of this year, probably doesn't play, or if he does, it's going to be 4 or 5 weeks. So
yeah, you got Hawkins.
I know that I was going to have an elite tight end at some point, which I valued. And this was something in the auto new basketball leagues that I ended up kind of striking luck with. It was the year Kevin Durant was on the ACL and Kyrie Irving was doing weird social media stuff. And I got both those guys for like $20 less in an auction format than what they would typically go for. Well, Kyrie Irving ended up playing 56 games because of the COVID things, and Durant ended up coming back and looking just as good. And my team ended up winning, and now I have a massive team. And frankly, that Ottoneu basketball team was kind of created because of how you created your dominant dynasty team, zigging when everyone else was zagging. So I think there's opportunity to capitalize on injured players or people of a depreciated market for 1 year. And I think Hawkinson's a perfect example of that. Now that we're just talking tight end. So
exactly. Yeah. You take someone that's way down in the 5th, 6th round this year, but any other startup year is going to be a 2nd round. There's immediate value there.
I think there absolutely is. Your team I liked a lot more than mine. We could discuss the Jonathan Taylor part probably another show. But any other quick hits from your team before we talk about guys that I think overall made a good roster?
I mean, I like Devontae Adams to bounce back, and that's part of the reason why I was comfortable going quarterback, tight end, because I knew I'd get Devontae Adams at a depressed price. And it's not like he's a one and done year 2. I still feel like we have 2-3 good seasons out of him. And once again, 3-year window, right? Like what we preached at the beginning. So I was a fan of him bouncing back here. I also thought Christian Watson in the 9th round was pretty underrated. He claims he's got the hamstring stuff figured out now. He went through all this testing and stuff at the University of Wisconsin down here, right where we are basically. And he thinks he's got it covered. The only knock on Watson has been injuries, because when he's on the field, he's their best deep threat. You've got a quarterback that's about to sign an extension in Love. But the Watson Jaden Reed debate is a very interesting one. I understand why Reed's ADP is higher, especially in a format like this, a little bit younger, maybe some more upside unknown, but I've seen plenty of Christian Watson on the field. If he can get out there for even 12, 13 games a year, I think I've got an absolute steal in the 9th round, who's also pretty dang young. I mean, Amari Cooper went by right after him, and I think Christian Watson's got a lot more great years than Amari Cooper coming, even though Cooper just had that little adjustment there. But so those are some of the targets that I got that I was very interested in getting, and why I felt okay going the first 3 rounds without a receiver.
Yeah, I loved how your team came out. And then you had also drafted Rashee Rice, which this is the TJ Hawkinson thing I just mentioned. People expecting a suspension this year for however long it might be. In any other dynasty startup scenario, I think Rice is probably a 3rd or 4th round pick. Outside activities excluded from that kind of equation.
Hasn't been suspended yet, for the record.
It's gonna whatever.
Who knows what happens in Goodell's random wheel of punishment? But yes, Rashee Rice was another interesting one where, again, I can make up more receiver talent later, and then after this year, after whatever 6-8 game suspension he gets, that whole thing is. And I got him probably a full round or 2 earlier than where I would have got him otherwise.
I wanted to point out real quick one of the teams that I thought did really well with the waiting on quarterback in Superflex. So the idea is, okay, we're going to make sure we lock up our 2 Superflex quarterbacks. You did that with your guys. I took Lamar Jackson, my first one. But Nick Whalen's team, of course, does SiriusXM, did the podcast with me throughout the offseason. I thought absolutely crushed it. So instead of going quarterback, took Justin Jefferson at 111, then it picked 2-2, took CeeDee Lamb. So talk about the core of your receiver group for the next, if this goes 10 years, Jake, probably set between those 2.
Yeah, then Jefferson and Lamb. Yeah, that's 40 points a week somehow or another between the 2 of them, and then McCaffrey. Perfect win now strategy.
I mean, that is exactly what you want to have. And then did get quarterback Jared Goff, who signed that extension earlier this offseason. So he'll be in Detroit, whether it's with Ben Johnson, the offense coordinator, for multiple years, remains to be seen. And then just continue to go, I think, zigging when everyone else was zagging with that. And getting in Amari Cooper, you mentioned, getting James Cook as the other running back. I don't like James Cook all that much, but at 6'11", totally fine for a young back. George Pickens, I think, is going to be one of my favorite best ball guys, possibly redraft 2 at 5'9". Traded up for Jake Ferguson with one of my picks, so got the starting lineup, and then eventually solved or kind of just said whatever on the second quarterback superflex with Sam Darnold in that it makes him. I wanted to point out
he's got Fields, Darnold,
a lot of dart throws, right?
Yeah,
which is
hoping
fine.
One sticks. Yep.
But since 2020, I think 19 quarterbacks have been drafted in the first round. And if you want to include Kyle Trask and Will Levis, who were the first pick in the second round, it's 21 quarterbacks. So over the last 4 years, 21 guys have been taken as the starter potential 4-year franchise. If you want to get a quarterback, you will be able to trade up and get one. You look at like the Bo Nixes and Michael Penix of the world, who are in startup or in like the rookie dynasty drafts are 111, 2-1, 2-3. You can get these young quarterbacks every single year. They might not work out. I think that's maybe the cautionary tale, like Trey Lance or Kenny Pickett or Zach Wilson. But there are going to be options if you really feel like you need to have a strong startup or a dynasty guy that I don't think you need to draft 2 right away. There are just too many first round guys that enter the league that get at least 3 years where I'm completely fine waiting to get my second quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, you know what? If it doesn't work out for you, guess what? You'll be picking high next year.
Do it again. Yes.
Spin the wheel one more time.
Anything else you want to mention, Jake, before we sign off for today?
Now, we're running pretty long here. I could take some time to rip on some of the bad teams, but
Ryan.
Okay. Let's just run
Real
one
quick.
here. I won't name names. They can figure it out.
Sorry.
Caleb Williams, Garrett Wilson, Malik Neighbors, Drake May, Dell Thomas, Coleman, Njoku, Spears, and Lloyd. Like, we're talking 80% rookies here. Tons of unproven talent. The only guy that is solid that is going to do good in that lineup is Garrett Wilson. The rest of these guys are absolute wild cards. Another one that I didn't love. Granted, okay, he started out pretty well. Jordan Love, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Puka Nacua. That could be good. I thought maybe going Love over Murray, Burrow, Herbert was a little bit of a stretch, but hey, maybe there's a homer pick in here. Then Kyle Pitts at 4 was a bit of a question mark.
I'm fine with that one.
You what?
I'm fine with that pick, actually. That's good.
I don't love Kyle Pitts in the 4th round. He's had
it was
I know the coaching.
Laporta, Kincaid, then Pitts. Like, if we're saying
Yeah.
dynasty, that's probably how it should go.
Yeah, fair, but granted, we got a whole new coaching regime here in Atlanta, and maybe he'll use his players a little bit better. But man, if Kyle Pitts was really that good, we would have seen that in 3 years here of him doing it. I don't see that pick in the 4th round. Saquon Barkley's kind of a waste with the pick after that, and then we go pretty rookie heavy after that. McConkey, Benson, Young. I don't love that team either. So there's going to be some easy pickings and some guys that might have a real tough time here for a couple of seasons here because they went way too rookie heavy. And now, granted, one of them is a commish. You want to do the dynasty thing, you want to do the dynasty thing in the spirit of the dynasty. But oh man, it's going to feel good walloping y'all by 100 points a week.
I think there's value to threading the needle between guys like your roster, like Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, for example, who again went round 9, and still getting younger players. Jeff Erickson did a great job having his team together. You could look at this on Twitter, JB Fantasy Sports at RotoJake. Getting younger players that are quality, but also getting some veterans, and then backing up again with youngers. Like, it's the Warriors' way of trying to do things where they had the Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, didn't get it quite right with the Jordan Poole, Moses Moody, Kuminga. But like that's what you want to shoot for.
I didn't take a rookie until Braylon Allen in the 17th round,
and that's a waste to pick. We know as Badger fans how bad he is now. I'm kidding.
I don't know. Whatever. I hardly knew the players left on the board in the 17th round here. But I would much rather spend money on a Devontae Smith or a Rashee Rice or, like I said, a Watson. Guys that are young, but at least I know are good, as opposed to taking a complete wild card on some of these no names that I'm not super familiar with. So, maybe, it's playing it a little bit safe, and maybe just maybe in 10 years I'll be toast, but at least I've won the league 3-4 times before then.
Well, you're going to get up to date on all these super young guys that you have not heard of, like Audric Estime and other ones like that, as we gear up towards the start of the regular season, when we'll officially be doing our Waiver Wire podcast every Tuesday moving forward. Until then, some evergreen content, some strategy-related content. We have our infamous over-under podcast that we do at the start of the season or close to it.
That'll
we have
be
the
second to last.
Auction strategy that we'll do. And again, I have a little present for us set up for that as well too when that time comes. So stick around again near our Twitter accounts or whatever, because we'll have more information or updates when that time gets a little bit closer for the users to participate. But otherwise, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you again next Tuesday.